While the world was consumed by the chaos of World War II, a small town in Illinois faced a terror of its own. A figure prowling in the night. A mysterious gas that left victims sick, paralyzed, and terrified in their own homes. Was it a criminal with access to deadly chemicals? A wartime saboteur testing America's vulnerability? Or simply a case of mass hysteria, fueled by fear and headlines? This is the story of the Mad Gasser of Mattoon, America's Phantom Anesthetic Prowler. Our story begins on the night of August 31st, 1944. It was just another summer evening in Mattoon, Illinois, a town of roughly 15,000 people. Quiet, ordinary, and far removed from the battlefields overseas. But for Elaine Kearney, a local woman living on Marshall Avenue, that night would become the stuff of nightmares. Around 11 p.m., Elaine was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep. Her husband was away working the late shift at the Illinois Central Railroad, and her children were tucked in nearby. Suddenly, a strange smell began to fill the room. She later described it as a sickly, sweet odor unlike anything she had smelled before. At first, she dismissed it as maybe coming from outside. But within minutes, her lips and throat began to burn. She tried to get up, to call for help, but her body wouldn't respond. She was paralyzed, pinned to the bed by an invisible force. Later, she would tell reporters, quote, "It was a kind of sweet, sickening smell. I felt paralyzed and couldn't get out of bed." Her sister, who was also in the home, noticed the odor as well and nearly fainted. Alarmed, she ran to a neighbor's house to call the police. By the time officers arrived, the smell had vanished. No prowler, no chemical residue, no trace of an intruder. But the Kearneys were not the only ones. This was just the beginning. 2 days later, another strange incident occurred. Mrs. Cords, a resident living nearby, reported that she was suddenly overcome by nausea and dizziness in her own home. When she looked out her window, she swore she saw a tall, thin man standing in the shadows near her yard. She only saw him for a moment, but it was long enough to leave a lasting impression. Quote, "I saw him standing for just a moment, then he slipped away into the shadows." When police investigated, they discovered footprints in the dirt outside her window, and, curiously, a woman's high-heeled shoe print next to them. Who was this mysterious figure? And what was he spraying into the homes of Mattoon's families? By the end of the first week of September, reports began to pour in almost nightly. Families claimed that sweet, chemical-smelling fumes seeped into their homes. Victims described burning throats, nausea, headaches, and in some cases, temporary paralysis. A few even claimed to see a dark figure fleeing into the night. One woman, Mrs. Scott, described waking suddenly to the strong odor of gas filling her bedroom. She told reporters, quote, "We thought we were going to die right there in bed." Her lips and tongue went numb, and she struggled to call out to her husband. When the couple investigated outside, they saw nothing but the quiet, empty street. Another family described feeling as though their home was being filled with fumes as if from a spray canister. Each time, police found little more than confused victims, strange smells, and in some cases, faint footprints in the dirt. The evidence was just enough to suggest that something, or someone, was out there. By mid-September, the entire town of Mattoon was in a state of near hysteria. Headlines in the Mattoon Journal-Gazette screamed of the anesthetic prowler. Rumors spread that he was a mad scientist, an escaped lunatic, even a Nazi spy testing chemical weapons on unsuspecting Americans. Police cars patrolled neighborhoods nightly. Local men armed themselves with guns, vowing to protect their families. Citizens phoned the police station dozens of times at night, reporting strange smells, movements in the shadows, and unexplained illnesses. Some even described catching a glimpse of the Mad Gasser himself, usually as a tall, thin man, dressed in dark clothing, moving quickly through the night. The fear was so widespread that one newspaper editorial noted, "The whole town seems to be holding its breath." To understand the terror that gripped Mattoon, it's worth hearing directly from the people who lived it. Their words paint a chilling picture. Mrs. Kearney, the first victim, told the local newspaper, quote, "I thought at first it was just a strong odor from flowers outside. But then my lips began to burn, my throat closed up, and I couldn't move. It was as if someone had poisoned the air in my own home." Mrs. Cords described seeing the figure outside her window. Her husband later added that their dog barked furiously at the same moment, as though reacting to an intruder. Yet, no one was ever caught. Another victim, a young mother, told police that her children woke in the night coughing and crying. She said, quote, "My children's lips were blue, and I feared they would suffocate. There was nothing I could do, we felt helpless." Each testimony carried the same elements: the sweet odor, sudden illness, the sense of paralysis, and the fleeting glimpse of a shadowy figure slipping into the dark. By mid-September, Mattoon was in chaos. Some nights brought as many as half a dozen reports. Officers were dispatched across the city, but each time, the so-called Mad Gasser vanished without a trace. Residents began arming themselves. Vigilantes patrolled the streets. Husbands sat up all night with watching their windows. And in a few cases, overzealous neighbors mistook one another for the prowler, nearly leading to accidental shootings. The press only amplified the terror. Headlines such as "Phantom Anesthetic Sprayer Strikes Again" and "Mad Anesthetic Prowler Eludes Officers" ran in bold print. What had started as a single odd report now consumed the identity of the entire town. The first and most obvious theory was that the Mad Gasser was a criminal with access to chemicals. Some believed he carried a hand-pump spray or a perfume atomizer filled with ether, chloroform, or some other anesthetic. These chemicals were widely used in the medical field, and some could be obtained without great difficulty at the time. But chemists later pointed out problems with this explanation. To render someone unconscious with ether or chloroform requires prolonged exposure, usually with a cloth directly over the mouth and nose. Simply spraying such a substance through a window would be unlikely to cause the paralysis or nausea described. At best, it might irritate the throat. So, was the criminal theory possible? Yes. Probable? Experts weren't so sure. Another theory was far darker, that the Gasser was a wartime saboteur. Remember, this was 1944, and the US was deep in the Second World War. Many Mattoon residents believed the attacks were a test, carried out by German or Japanese agents preparing to use chemical weapons on American soil. The rumors were fueled by the era's paranoia. German U-boats had been spotted off the East Coast. Japanese fire balloons had landed on the West Coast. Why not chemical agents in Illinois? But this theory also lacked evidence. No foreign agents were ever discovered, and the war effort never revealed such a plot. Still, for many at the time, it was a terrifying possibility. The explanation most favored by police and psychologists was mass hysteria. This is when collective anxiety produces real physical symptoms, like shortness of breath, dizziness, and nausea, without an external cause. In other words, fear itself makes people sick. There are many examples in history. In 1939, in Halifax, Canada, hundreds reported gas attacks that were later found to be non-existent. In 1962, in a textile factory in the US, dozens of workers fell ill in what was called the June bug epidemic, a classic case of mass psychogenic illness. Mattoon was already on edge. Families had loved ones overseas. rumors of spies and saboteurs were common. Combine that with frightening newspaper headlines, and suddenly, every cough, every strange odor, every creak in the night could be blamed on the Mad Gasser. Mattoon had several nearby factories and industrial plants, some of which used chemicals in production. A malfunction, a leak, or even routine operations could have released fumes into the night air. The sweet odor described by residents may have been linked to industrial byproducts, mistaken for a prowler's gas attack. This could explain why the incident seemed concentrated in certain neighborhoods, and why the smell often vanished before police arrived. Of course, no mystery is complete without the possibility of a prank. Some suspected local teenagers, armed with a spray can or pump, simply trying to frighten their neighbors. But could a prank really sustain weeks of reports? It seemed unlikely, though not impossible. And then, there were the fringe theories that the Mad Gasser was a government experiment, a rogue chemist, even, in the wildest speculation, a visitor from beyond our world. While these ideas lack evidence, they demonstrate just how desperate people were to explain the unexplained. By the end of September 1944, the report suddenly stopped. The Mad Gasser vanished as quickly as he had appeared. Police eventually dismissed the case as hysteria. Many residents, however, never accepted this. They insisted that something, or someone, had been creeping around their homes. Today, the Mad Gasser of Mattoon remains one of America's most bizarre unsolved mysteries. Was it a prowler with chemicals, an industrial accident, or nothing more than fear magnified by the press? We may never know. But what we do know is this. In the summer of 1944, a small town was gripped by a terror so powerful, it turned ordinary nights into scenes from a nightmare. And nearly 80 years later, the legend of the Mad Gasser still lingers. An unsolved riddle of fear, hysteria, and the shadows of war. Thank you for joining us in this deep dive into one of history's strangest cases. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more mysteries, crimes, and forgotten stories from the past. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.